Week 5 was a marathon for many NFL fans, and we're here to cover all the major headlines, including Robert Saleh's firing from the New York Jets. Hi everyone, this is Spectator Sports. I'm your host Sebastian Fonseca. If you want to help Spectator Sports grow and reach a bigger audience, please do us a massive favor, drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And if you want to get clips from today's episode, we have that for you here on YouTube as well as on TikTok. But if you want to enjoy this from an audio perspective, we got that for you too on Spotify. And if you're looking for the Thursday night recap between the Bucks and Falcons, we got that for you too. I'll link it for you in the description along with the other stuff I just mentioned. And let's get into a very juicy episode of Spectator Sports. Robert Saleh started off his Tuesday morning business as usual, game planning for a Monday night matchup against the Buffalo Bills. Well, the meddling owner Woody Johnson had other ideas. After losing 2 straight games, with the latter being across the pond in England against the Minnesota Vikings, Woody Johnson has had enough. He has fired Robert Saleh after 5 games, and the main reason why Saleh was fired was that his plan was to fire OC Nathaniel Hackett. And knowing that Aaron Rodgers basically runs this organization, that wasn't going to fly with the owner. Aaron has too much weight and power in this organization, and this was going to cause a power struggle, and Woody Johnson showed him the door. And Saleh was even escorted by security out the door. He didn't even have a chance to address his team, and it was very strange to see that he was treated like a criminal in this manner. It wasn't really handled the correct way, not to my liking. So a few things with this is why now? Why at this moment after 5 games? Because even though you're 2-3, you could turn this around with a win against the Buffalo Bills this upcoming Monday night, and you could go to 3-3, 2-0 in your division, and you have the inside track to winning this AFC East. The other aspect is the defense isn't the reason why the Jets are 2-3. In fact, so the reason why they have been in any game so far this season. Defense is something that got Robert Saleh the job from his days in San Francisco with the 49ers, and his defense has been very solid throughout his entire Jets tenure. The problem is the offense. The offense hasn't been consistent. Now, they did have a decent performance against the New England Patriots on Thursday Night Football a couple weeks ago, but that's ancient history. We've seen that the New England Patriots have been one of the worst teams in football, and they struggle against the Denver Broncos, and Aaron Rodgers threw 3 interceptions, 1 being a pick 6 in that loss against the Minnesota Vikings. The other decision was they appointed the defensive coordinator Jeff Ulbrich as the interim head coach. This takes him away from what he is supposed to do as coaching the defense, and now he has to manage an entire roster. I understand that Nathaniel Hackett wasn't good in his time as head coach with the Denver Broncos, but it would make sense given that small experience that he would take over as head coach given that small sample size and the experience over in Denver. But I think the optics of that would have been too obvious that Aaron Rodgers has all the power in this organization, so it made sense for Woody Johnson to just appoint Jeff Ulbrich as the interim head coach. The other aspect in doing this now is that you leave the players now playing for themselves because they don't know if they're going to be here next year. So they have to get their best tape out for themselves right now. There's no guarantees that under a new regime that they would be back here. So that's going to be somewhat of a divided locker room. And the other caveat is that they could rally behind Jeff Ulbrich. And that puts the Jets in another pickle because in years past, teams have rallied behind an interim head coach, and then they somewhat back themselves into appointing them as the full-time head coach. We saw that just last year with the Vegas Raiders after the firing of McDaniels. That led to the appointing of Antonio Pierce as the interim head coach and now basically the full-time head coach of the Vegas Raiders. And while that was good short term, we see now with all this Davante Adams mess and the kind of bad start with the Raiders so far in 2024 that it was probably the wrong decision for the Vegas Raiders. And doing this early for the New York Jets, this doesn't sit well with me, not at all. Now, the other layer in this Jets onion is the Davante Adams rumors. It's been known now after a week that Davante Adams wants out of Vegas, and the top two destinations have been New Orleans, given his history with Derek Carr, and the New York Jets, with his history with Aaron Rodgers. Well, why would Davante want to leave one shaky situation for an even shakier situation with the New York Jets? Yes, he's playing with his guy that he's had success with in Green Bay, but it is shaky ground here in New York with the New York Jets. It doesn't make sense. The only way that the Jets could even try to trade for him, or that Davante would want to play for a team like the Jets, is that he is just banking in on his guy Aaron Rodgers, and that they can rekindle the magic that they had over in Green Bay. Now, getting back to Robert Saleh, during his time as head coach of the New York Jets, he compiled a 20-36 record, including a 2-3 start this year. Now, if you think about what went on during this tenure with the New York Jets, he started off taking the gig and the Jets having the second overall pick, and they had an opportunity to take their franchise quarterback. But it wasn't Robert Saleh that fell in love with Zach Wilson after making one really nice throw at his pro day. It wasn't Robert Saleh that continued to put Zach Wilson in situations that wasn't going to work out for him. And it wasn't Robert Saleh's offense, because he's a defensive-minded head coach, that had backup quarterbacks looking better than Zach Wilson. And it wasn't Robert Saleh that brought in Aaron Rodgers coming into his age 39 season in the NFL. These are all on Jets management. This is all on Woody Johnson and the GM of the New York Jets. That's not Robert Saleh's fault. And what I'm getting at, that this poor run of a 20-36 record through 4.5 seasons with the New York Jets isn't Saleh's fault. I thought he's never had his fair shot with the Jets because he hasn't had a quarterback. He hasn't had consistent quarterback play. There were 6 quarterbacks that started games under Saleh's tenure. And if you look at the names on this list, and then just looking at 6 games, not even 6 games, it was 5 games and 4 plays of Aaron Rodgers, that is not a fair sample size. So it's a giant incomplete, a what if, of Saleh's tenure so far with the New York Jets. The Jets front office hung Robert Saleh to dry. They put Zach Wilson out there in situations where they knew he wasn't ready for a situation that he was going to fail in. And they put Robert Saleh in front of presser after presser, trying to put in support, his stamp of approval, despite Zach Wilson not playing good football, missing throws, turning over the ball, and having poor decisions time in and time out. And it took until halfway through the 2022 season in his sophomore campaign for them to finally bench Zach Wilson. And like I said, this is all coming back to the front office. Saleh did his job on the defensive side. He had nurtured a good defense, but every time that you had Zach Wilson back there, it wasn't going to be a good offensive performance. We knew that. And coming into 2024, Saleh was again under pressure. He already was missing Aaron Rodgers in minicamp, and there was this whole lack of communication on what the reason was Aaron Rodgers was to miss it. And it turns out he was in Egypt on a vacation, not with his team. And they always seem to be on different pages. You saw that in game 3 of the regular season that they were trying to embrace. Saleh was trying to give Rodgers a hug, but Aaron kind of pushed him back. And that kind of opened up the door, like, is there tension there? Is that visible tension? And then there were jibes. There was snapping at each other in press conferences. And this all sort of came back to not having a fair slate of this. This was the first time that he was going to have a healthy Aaron Rodgers, and the offense was improving with a couple additions on the receiving room and the offensive line. The defense was still an elite unit, but Woody Johnson pulled the plug after this in 5 games. In San Francisco, you saw Saleh be demonstrative, energetic, even being one of the guys on defense. Well, when he came to New York, he was mostly a puppet of the Jets organization. He was quiet. He was basically parroting whatever the front office wanted him to say. And he wasn't really himself. He kind of lost himself into it. So honestly, I'm relieved that he's removed from this toxic situation. And now let's see how the Jets move forward now in this period of uncertainty in 2024. And in a way, I am relieved that Robert Saleh is removed from this toxic mess that is the Jets front office and the organization, because now he doesn't have to wake up with an organization full of dysfunction and a meddling owner. He can just kind of be at peace, and I'm sure he's going to have a gig as a defensive coordinator sometime in 2025. But now we wait and see what's the next chapter of the Aaron Rodgers New York Jets saga. Now, getting into the actual recap of Week 5, the Jets did play a game out in England against the Minnesota Vikings. And in the process, Aaron Rodgers laid a dud. 3 picks, and one of them was taken back to the house by Andrew Van Ginkel. And the Minnesota Vikings, who had Sam Darnold going against his former team that gave up on him in 2021, beat the New York Jets 23-17. And while it wasn't the best of performances from Sam Darnold, it was still a very good defensive performance from this Vikings defense led by Brian Flores. Now, every throw that Sam Darnold needed to make, I thought he did, especially late in the fourth quarter. And anytime he was in duress, he found Justin Jefferson, whether it was him catching the ball for first downs or him even drawing penalties against Jets defenders. And this was a kind of a ticky-tack, a soft kind of refereeing game where they didn't seem to allow for much contact, but still the Jets offense didn't seem to get going, and that was really the issue of this whole game. 3 interceptions, and one was the game-ending interception when the Jets had a chance to win the game. Rodgers is driving the Jets into the red zone, and he's trying to go back shoulder to Mike Williams, but Stephon Gilmore, still in this league, was able to undercut the route, and basically the Jets seem to always have this ability to hang around against the elite competition in this league, but they just don't make the right plays at the right time, and they sometimes shoot themselves in the foot as well. We saw it a ton last year against the Kansas City Chiefs. It was like penalty after penalty, and they had that game hanging in the balance. But unfortunately, the Jets now have to move on without Robert Saleh as their head coach, and now we usher in the Jeff Ulbrich era, at least interim-wise, in New York. With the Vikings, they now head into the bye week 5-0, and I think this is a team that exceeded expectations. I mean, we've always been thinking that the Vikings were going to be last place in this uber competitive NFC North, but they have beaten the Green Bay Packers, and now they have 2 weeks to prepare for the Detroit Lions. And I think with that is going to be a big test to see if they are for real. But given now they have 2 weeks to prepare, I think this is going to be a big advantage for the Minnesota Vikings in their next matchup, as not only the balance of the NFC North hangs in this game, but also just the entire conference in the NFC. The Bengals and Ravens have been such a fun rivalry, especially when Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson are healthy. Last year, we didn't get 2 quality matchups because Joe Burrow hurt his wrist and ended up being out for the rest of the season last year. And 2022 and 2021 were muddled by Lamar Jackson injuries. Well, now we saw these 2 guys go head-to-head, both fully healthy, and man, was it an offensive explosion. I mean, Lamar Jackson goes off for 300-plus yards passing, 4 touchdown passes, and Joe Burrow counters with nearly 400 yards passing with 5 touchdown passes. And Jamar Chase, after being relatively quiet for much of the season, mainly with that contract dispute, but he put it to bed, and he had a stellar performance against the Ravens, almost 200 yards receiving. And this is a guy that can make pretty much every route in the route tree looks so easy to get space, and he can catch contested balls. He can generate space with his route running ability, like I was saying. And there was one of these sequences where he just caught a screen pass and made something out of nothing and bursted through the right side of the Ravens defense all the way for a touchdown. Now, in the second half, the Bengals were in control for much of this game. They had double-digit leads several times, but it came down to the final minutes after they hit T. Higgins on a slant. They were in field goal range, so they were up 3 already, so they either had a chance to make it a 2-possession lead with a touchdown or at least push the lead up to 6. Now, unfortunately for the Bengals, Joe Burrow was looking Jamar Chase's way, and the route was undercut by Marlon Humphrey making a great play on the ball and possession back to the Ravens. They were able to go down the field and tie up the game, and this game is going into overtime. Now, in overtime, the Ravens are in Bengals territory, probably need about 5-10 yards to get into Justin Tucker's range. Well, Lamar mishandles the snap, and it's recovered by the Bengals, and it's taken back into Ravens territory. Now, the Bengals go very conservative. I don't know if it was just because the last throw Joe Burrow really threw was an interception and they were just trying to play for the field goal. Well, they played a little too conservatively because a 53-yard kick isn't a gimme in this league. But unfortunately for them, the field goal, it was 53 yards. Now, that's a very makeable kick in today's NFL, but the hold by the punter wasn't a good hold, and that kind of disrupted the timing. It was a shank kick, and next play, Derrick Henry takes it all the way to the 6-yard line. Justin Tucker nails it through the uprights, and the Ravens steal a victory on the road in their own division and now have won 3 straight games in a row after an 0-2 start. And in this sequence, you got to think about who they've beaten. It's been quality competition. And they've beaten the Dallas Cowboys, the Buffalo Bills, and now the Cincinnati Bengals. And credit to Lamar. I mean, they really sold out to stop Derrick Henry in the run basically until overtime, when I think they were gassed, and Derrick Henry really almost made him pay by almost taking it in himself, but he had a 50-yard run there. But Lamar himself, this was probably one of his best games as a passer. They really limited him in the running category, but in the passing, they were able to get exploited for. They had one-on-one coverage against Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman and Nelson Aguilar, but I thought that Lamar diced up this Bengals defense, and that's been the Achilles heel of these 2024 Bengals. Their pass defense has been suspect. And there was a sequence where Lamar's legs really was put on display, but not as, again, a runner. It was a passer. He was buying time, fading towards the right side, and even stiff-arming Sam Hubbard along the way, and found Isaiah Likely for a touchdown. And those are really the difference in the game. And instead of turning into field goals or turnovers or empty trips, these are turning into touchdowns. The Bengals, for whatever reason, just cannot get off to fast starts under Zach Taylor. You can throw away the first year in his career because that was without Joe Burrow and it was a hopeless team. From 2021 onwards, they've been a contending team, but they've consistently got off to slow starts in September, and now they're 1-4. And they have a ton of problems. Defensively, they cannot stop a nosebleed. And their game plan basically is just let Joe cook with 2 really good receivers with no running game. I mean, Chase Brown was probably pretty good in this game. He had his best yards per carry, I think, in his entire season, but not a consistent threat, and they're a very one-dimensional team, kind of like the Dallas Cowboys. Well, if this doesn't turn around anytime soon, I don't expect them to be the fringe dark horse Super Bowl contenders that I initially expected them to be. They could mess around and somehow get into the playoffs. They're just that good offensively with Joe Burrow, but I don't see them making a lot of noise. And unfortunately, this could lead to Zach Taylor losing his job and them having to retool with a very different roster. The Houston Texans very nearly blew this game. I mean, they were up 20-3 in the first half. They were coasting with a couple of CJ Stroud turnovers, kind of opened Pandora's box. He had an interception and later a fumble deep inside their own territory where the Buffalo Bills converted for a field goal to take that as a tie. And in the waning seconds, this is when the issue sort of came about, where the Texans pinned the Buffalo Bills deep inside their own 5-yard line. And with under a minute left, you probably just play for overtime. It's just way too risky. Something could go wrong. But I don't know if this was Sean McDermott's call, whether it was Josh Allen's call, or whether it was the OC. Whoever it was made a bad decision because it was throw, only taking off 12 seconds off the clock. And this led to the Bills punting it away. The punter didn't even have the full field to work with to get room to kick off the ball. The Texans field the ball around midfield. They take it inside to Bills territory, and then they only need about 5 yards to get to the edges of their kicker's range, which in today's NFL, it's very doable to make like a 58, 60-yard kick, and that's what happened. The Bills hand the Texans a victory. And despite the Texans losing Nico Collins in this matchup, I thought it was a great deal of poise just to grind out a victory when you lose a very talented piece. Nico has been really good for this team, and he's been arguably one of the best receivers in this league, at least this year. But his time is going to be missed, and it's going to be like a week-to-week type of deal with this team. But with what the Bills are doing, this is just another miscue that's led to a very bad defeat. They're already coming off a huge loss against the Baltimore Ravens, and that was a game where their defensive injuries seemed to catch up with them. They just got completely bludgeoned by Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson. And this kind of game was very different, but they didn't seem into it unless it was thanks to these Texans miscues. And yet again, it comes down to Josh Allen, and I understand you are bereft of weapons. There's no Stephon Diggs. In fact, he's playing for the other team in this matchup. But you still have Keon Coleman, the up-and-coming rookie. You still have Dalton Kincaid. You have James Cook. And there were countless times that Josh Allen just missed throws. I understand he was plagued by drops in this game. I was commenting on things on other pages on social media, and Bills fans just came after me saying that he was plagued by drops. I acknowledge that, Bills Mafia. But there were a lot of times that your boy Josh Allen just missed throws. He made the bad read. Let's just acknowledge that he is a guy that can be flawed. And this was a game that he was very inaccurate. 9 out of 30. I mean, I've seen guys play with bad NFL talent, let's be honest, but they can at least complete 50% of their passes, maybe even 40, right? This guy completed 30% of his passes in an NFL game. One catch and 49 yards of that 131-yard total came from a Keon Coleman catch and run. And that was pretty wide open too. And protection held up in this game. It wasn't like Josh was under duress. It was just the receivers either weren't getting separation or dropping passes, or him just flat out missing him. I saw at least 3 to 4 good misses out there from Josh Allen that could have turned into touchdowns, absolutely. So Josh absolutely needs to work on the accuracy, because this is something where we've seen this kind of come back in the last couple of years ever since Brian Daboll has left. And now with no Stephon Diggs as your security blanket, the Bills face a massive test next week. The New York Jets next week on Monday Night Football, and that's going to be a big test. The Jets are coming in reeling off of 2 consecutive losses. They're desperate for a win. And even if the Bills handle business there, let's say, that would basically put them in the driver's seat to win this division, the AFC East. What does that prove? The AFC East is one of the worst divisions in football. The Patriots are totally lost this year. The Miami Dolphins are completely clueless without Tua Tagovailoa. And the Jets, they're not looking that great after 5 games. So if they do that, what does that prove? Not a lot to me. The Texans look better. They just beat the Bills. The Ravens just beat them last week, and they don't have a prayer against the Kansas City Chiefs. So yes, they might win this division, but I do project them at this point to be a first-round exit for the Buffalo Bills. Jayden Daniels has lit up the NFL. After losing his opening start against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, he has the Washington Commanders on a 4-game winning streak, first place in the division and second place in the conference. And he's doing it all through the air, especially he was known as a run first type of guy, but he is a very good passer of the football. And it's not just the Charlie check down passes through short intermediate passes. He is chucking it deep to Diami Brown or Terry McLaurin, whoever it may be. And he's very accurate with the ball. And so far, the Washington Commanders have looked really good through 5 games, and now it's a matter of can they beat the Baltimore Ravens in the Battle of the Beltway, because that's probably going to be their biggest test in this very young season. And if they do that, I think that we're going to put the league on notice that the Washington Commanders are going to be a threat for years to come, especially with Jayden Daniels. Late game execution haunts the 49ers yet again in a upset matchup between the Arizona Cardinals and the San Francisco 49ers. The Cardinals go into Levi Stadium and beat the 49ers behind Kyler Murray's excellent game-winning drive. And in the first quarter, he seemed like he was really on it. He had a 44-yard run for a touchdown, and late game execution haunts the 49ers yet again in a upset matchup between the Arizona Cardinals and the San Francisco 49ers. The Cardinals go into Levi Stadium and beat the 49ers behind Kyler Murray's excellent game-winning drive. And in the first quarter, he seemed like he was really on it. He had a 44-yard run for a touchdown, and as soon as he crossed the 40-yard line, he raised his hand in the air and immediately knew he was going to score. He's just that fast. And despite them moving the ball pretty well, at least the Cardinals, they still didn't have the score to reflect it because of a blocked field goal by the 49ers that they took back to the house. And it was a frustrating way because it was 23-10, but you have been outgaining your opponent by a significant margin. Now, in the second half, the defense clamps down. They get a bunch of stops and forcing a couple turnovers from Brock Purdy, get a fumble in the red zone that really ignites them to make this comeback. And yes, the 49ers were playing without Jake Moody, who seemed to suffer a high ankle sprain on a kickoff. And playing without your kicker is really, really hard, don't get me wrong. That's just an unfortunate sequence. But the 49ers still had their chances to ice this game. The Jordan Mason fumble in particular, I thought was really bad. Going for the knockout touchdown, end it right there. But Jordan Mason fumbles and then basically opens up Pandora's box for the Cardinals, because Kyler Murray leads a touchdown drive to first cut the lead to 2 points because they were down 10. And I thought this was a nice call by Jonathan Gannon where he decides to go for 2 to cut the lead to 2, so then all you need is a field goal. And then after that Jordan Mason fumble, Kyler Murray leads them down the field for the game-winning field goal. Defense gets a stop, and they hit Brock Purdy's arm to force the errant throw, intercepted, and they close out the game. And this Cardinals team is very, very feisty. I think that they're laying the framework now. Last year was them kind of dealing with a bunch of quarterback issues and then Kyler getting back up to speed. But now he's at the full off season, and they already beat the LA Rams and now the San Francisco 49ers. And they're looking pretty good. I think they'd really have some holes though, but they have a really good receiving room with Marvin Harrison Jr. He made an excellent 4th down grab to keep that game-winning drive alive. It was like a fade route basically where sold out for an all-out blitz, but Kyler hung tough in the pocket and lofted it for Marvin Harrison Jr. to go up and get it. The defense is kind of in the works, but it's still a good unit. It just play really hard thanks to Jonathan Gannon. And now looking at the 49ers side of things, this again comes back to Kyle Shanahan not executing late. You're up 23-10 and you don't score a single point in the second half. You have opportunities to score and you're just not getting it done. This is now the 3rd close loss that you've had. You are now 2-3 in a very competitive division, and now you have to turn it around against the Seahawks, who, yes, have been losing a couple of games, but they still look really good, and they're going to be playing that on a short turnaround on Thursday Night Football. If they don't pull that out, it's going to look very grim for the 49ers, who news comes to us that they are now going to be missing McCaffrey for more time because he's now having tendonitis in both of his Achilles. It's not just one Achilles calf tightness and tendonitis. It is both. Bilateral Achilles tendonitis. Now, he went to Germany, looked at a specialist, but now it's time to determine if it's just rest and let it kind of settle down on its own. But still is going to be a very tricky thing because even if he does come back at some time, he's going to be walking on eggshells. It's going to be very difficult to see if he can really get that burst that we know that Christian McCaffrey can have. And the schedule doesn't get any easier for the 49ers. And if we don't see McCaffrey by the time that they come back from the bye week, I think it's safe to say that they might just show him for the season, just have him come back in 2025 and basically ends any type of title hopes that the 49ers can expect for this season. The Dallas Cowboys defeat the Pittsburgh Steelers 20-17. Dak Prescott leads the Cowboys on a game-winning drive that included a botched fumble where he was able to recover the ball after getting knocked out from Rico Dowell's hands, and he recovered at the 4-yard line, and it was a 4th down and goal situation, do or die situation, and he found Jalen Tolbert for the game-winning score. And he shook off 3 turnovers, a couple in the red zone and a couple interceptions, but still credit to him. He was able to hang tough, and the Cowboys now have won a couple of games despite losing some good talent on the defensive side with no DeMarcus Lawrence, no Micah Parsons. And they go in on the road in a very rainy environment that was also delayed due to lightning storms in Pittsburgh. And the game started at 9:45 kickoff and ended around 1 a.m. Eastern time. For the Steelers, this is going to be a game where they definitely are going to regret losing because they had 3 defensive turnovers and a blocked field goal to boot, but couldn't do much offensively. You're outgained 445 to 226, almost double the production. And many people are going to go to Justin Fields as the scapegoat, and they're going to probably clamor to bring in Russell Wilson as the starter. Well, I don't think this is on Justin Fields because this has just been the culture of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Since Ben Roethlisberger retired, they've been trying to find the next franchise quarterback in Pittsburgh. They tried it with Kenny Pickett, didn't really work out, and they just don't really emphasize the offensive side of the ball. The Pittsburgh Steelers organization is based off of tarred, tough defense. They're a town that was the center of the steel industry way back when. In the 70s, they had dominating defense that translated to 4 Super Bowls in a single decade. Even in the 2010s with Troy Polamalu and Rodney Harrison. And even in the late 2010s, when they had Troy Polamalu and James Harrison, that was a team built on defense with Ben Roethlisberger as a good quarterback that led them to a couple Super Bowls. Well, since Ben Roethlisberger had Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell, that was probably the most prolific offense in Steelers history, but they didn't decide to pay Le'Veon Bell, and then they eventually traded Antonio Brown for obvious reasons. The Steelers haven't really focused on offense since. They've made some swings, but they really focus their assets on the defensive end, and that's great. Defense does win championships, but like I was saying last year with the Bears about them going back to this historic identity of defense, well, the NFL is an evolving league, and it's been trending towards offense for a couple of decades now. Let's just face it. Physicality is down. The hitting area has been reduced to below the neck and above the knees. Yes, you got to give credit to Mike Tomlin for not having losing seasons, but since 2016, they haven't won a playoff game. He owns a 8-10 record. So many one-and-done performances where they make the postseason as the 6th or 7th seed, and they flounder in the first round. Is that really success for the Pittsburgh Steelers, a franchise built on championship? When did they settle for just above mediocre being attributed to their success? And if you're looking at the offensive room right now, it's Justin Fields. It's a very mediocre offensive line. an okay running back in Najee Harris, but mostly washed up at this point, and a very moody George Pickens, who we saw have a very not so nice interaction against Jordan Lewis in the waning seconds of the Steelers-Cowboys matchup. And I understand culture is very important, but like I said with the Chicago Bears last year, it's time that you evolve or die out, and I'd recommend that to the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's time to evolve or get left behind in the Stone Ages. Last year, the Liberty and Aces met up in the WNBA Finals, and it was the Aces that won the Finals 3-1 to go back-to-back. And this year, they met in the semifinals, and this time, the Liberty exacted revenge on the Aces. The Aces were going for a three-peat, and this is something that hasn't been done in a long time in the WNBA. But this time, they just did not have the horses for this kind of competition. A'ja Wilson won the MVP honor for this year, but she was a one-woman wrecking crew in this. The surrounding cast really dropped off in this postseason run and the entire season as a whole. But let's also give credit to the Liberty. I mean, in this entire series, they've been looking at this as a rematch, but they handled business. It all starts off with Breanna Stewart and Sabrina Ionescu. In the games that they won, they had a really good margin of the rebounding category where they dominated on the glass. If you just look at game 4 in particular, they won by such a wide margin thanks to that rebounding margin. Sabrina has been the best player in this series. I know A'ja Wilson did her thing, but there were some times where she was limited, and Sabrina's ability to shoot from deep was really the difference for the Liberty. If she's able to replicate this in the finals, I mean, it is the Liberty's title to lose, whoever it is between the Lynx or the Connecticut Sun. So that's it for this episode of Spectator Sports. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you want to get clips from this episode or the past episodes or even the Thursday night recap between Bucks and Falcons, I'll link that for you in the description, plus the Spotify link for the audio version of this podcast. Shout out to Joey for editing this video, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Don't forget to like and subscribe.